Hi, everybody. So today we're doing our series on cardiovascular and prediabetes prevention. And so today we're talking about limiting salt intake to control blood pressure. So what is high blood pressure? Blood pressure or hypertension is the force of blood pushing against the walls of your arteries. High blood pressure means that the force pushing against the walls of your arteries is higher than it should be. Blood pressure is measured as two numbers, with the systolic number on top and the diastolic on the bottom. The systolic is the pressure in the artery when the heart is beating, and the diastolic is the pressure in the artery when the heart is at rest. High blood pressure is when the systolic, or the top number, is 130 or above, and the systolic number, which is on the bottom, is 80 or higher.
And so why exactly is this bad? So having high blood pressure or hypertension is when the force of the blood pushing against the wall of your arteries is too high, or that it's higher than it should be. So blood pressure is measured as two numbers, of course, with the systolic on top and the diastolic on bottom.
So, sorry, we had a duplicate slide here. So the reason why blood pressure is bad is because it causes the edges of the arteries to flake, and that causes cholesterol to get stuck in there. And the cholesterol in your blood will get stuck in the cell that is flaking up, and it can clog the arteries. It also can cause the arteries to burst, causing aneurysms or strokes, and those are leaks in the body when the vessel bursts. So those can cause a lot of damage.
And so who actually has high blood pressure? So the American Heart Association estimates that about half of people over age of 20 have high blood pressure. And it's often dubbed the silent killer because a lot of times people don't actually experience any symptoms, and so they just kind of live with having high blood pressure. But it's important to be regularly screened for high blood pressure so that you can make changes in your lifestyle to control it and begin treatment as soon as possible to avoid, starting that damage that can occur to your body.
So why is salt bad for blood pressure? Like, what is the linkage there? So eating a lot of salt causes the electrolyte concentration of the blood to increase, or it becomes, you could say, condensed. So it has a lot of salt and other electrolytes in there, such as potassium, and sodium is salt. So in response to the blood being too concentrated, the body adds more water, kind of to water it down and make sure it's at the right concentration for the body. So this added water actually causes the pressure in the artery to increase, and that causes a greater force onto the artery and can cause damage.
So how can you limit salt? One of the more important things is to read the labels. And so generally you want to limit your salt intake to about 2,300 milligrams of salt per day. But on average, Americans actually eat around 3,400 milligrams a day. So over 1,000 more we tend to eat. And checking labels is a great way to make sure that you're within your limit. And you can actually find that right here. So they'll have it marked out on the nutrition facts label, sodium, how many milligrams, and they'll even tell you, what percentage of the daily value each serving is of sodium.
So looking at these two labels, we often think, well, pretzels aren't that salty compared to potato chips, right? But actually the pretzels have 600 milligrams and the potato chips only have 120. So it's really important that you check the labels to make choices that can keep your sodium within the daily limit. So another great way is to wash your canned food with water. Washing your canned vegetables, tuna, and beans before cooking can reduce the sodium content by up to 40%. And canned foods can be part of a healthy lifestyle because you can get your vegetable and bean and protein intake through canned foods, and they're relatively affordable. But just giving them that extra wash can really reduce the sodium and keep you within your daily limit.
And so you can also buy fresh food as opposed to a lot of processed and canned food and like canned meats and stuff like that, because they contain a lot of salt to keep them shelf stable. And so one of the things you can do, of course, as Rainer said, is you can wash the foods off with with water. You can do that with canned stuff, but even just avoiding a lot of processed foods. And with cooking yourself, you can actually control the amount of sodium that you're putting in, as opposed to, taking a box of food and just throwing it in the pan and cooking it up. It already has all that salt in it. By cooking it yourself and with fresh ingredients, you can actually control, how much salt you're putting into it.
So another way is to avoid restaurants and processed foods. So this chart shows where our salt intake comes from. And the large proportion, or 71%, it comes from already processed foods or restaurant foods. So restaurants, of course, they want it to taste good. So they put a lot of salt in there instead of using other spices sometimes. And they don't really necessarily have health in mind when they're cooking, because you're going to a restaurant for the experience, for the taste, right? So I guess that's not their priority. And then packaged and processed foods have tons of salt in them to keep the shelf life stable. So just limiting those things in cooking at home can really cut down on your salt intake. So added at the table is only 5%. Naturally occurring salts in foods is 14%. And home cooking preparation is 6%. So you can really hone in on salt intake by cooking at home more often, and maybe only eating out on weekends, for example.
And so you can also cook with spices in place of salt. So there's a lot of different spices to choose from. There's a lot of different combinations, and it's an opportunity to kind of get creative and see what you like. And on the screen here, we actually have a salt substitute recipe. All you need to do is combine basil, thyme, coriander, onion powder, parsley, cumin, garlic, mustard, cayenne, and paprika. And you can get like a nice substitute in place of using salt. And actually, we do have a wolf seasoning here at the clinic. If you're interested in that, you can talk to one of the dietitians, Lauren or Alex, and they'll be able to kind of tell you more about that. But that's another kind of example of a seasoning that you can use to sort of cut back on salt.
And this salt substitute recipe is very similar to it's called the wolf blend. But this is kind of similar to like this is kind of similar to like a Lawry's or a Goya adobo salt, like a seasonal type thing, and it works really well in place of a salt. Mrs. Dash is also a good one, and they have a lot of different flavors, and those are sodium-free seasonings. I know they also have a chicken bouillon that is sodium-free as well, and that's something to check into. So that concludes our talk today on how to reduce salt intake. But if you have any questions regarding high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or prediabetes, send us the email at hpdp@glith.net. Thank you, everybody, and see you next week.